Okay. We are going to talk about Carl Jung as an example today. And you can see that he's a 2-4. Okay. This is a cross of the unexpected as a design. And we see that he is get my pen out. Pen, there you are. A basic split. So he's pure generator with emotional authority, split definition. He's got splenic to the G to the throat. So accordingly, then, we know that this man is here to collaborate with other people, that he has the focused recognition of feelings, energy and feelings in cycles. So in response, he's here to recognize feelings in others. Does that sound like Carl Jung to you? Also unconsciously collaborating with others in order to perfect the form for survival as an alpha leader, for good or bad. Naturally able to ground his leadership within here, imagination or dreams of what could be. And unconsciously here to influence his tribe. So his responding to the call to be an alpha who can get people off on a new journey in order to influence with generosity or not his tribe and ground his influence inside of the purpose or meaning of life. So right there, I was just keynoting off the cuff. So we get to know what this person is here for first in an analysis. And in the conditioning of the centers, we look, okay, what's the priority? There's going to be 1, 2, and 3, basically. So if the transit brings in conditioning, then we know that year is going to bring a kind of experience or conditioning, his availability to learn about the life, his life in context, in relational context to what's coming in, what's open inside of him that's being influenced by the people coming into his life that year. Okay. What are the people coming into his life going to do, going to cause as a conditioning effect of him living his year that he's going to go through? Okay, so we've got that. Now, with Carl, Ross says, this is an emotional generator. In dealing with someone like this who comes in and has a reading with you, they want to have in return, you really have to go back to remind them that they're an emotional generator and there's no truth in now. So you hear very basic, right? Very basic. At the very beginning of a solar analysis, you give them the keys, the basic keys. That's one of the opportunities that you have to yearly touch in with someone about their design. Quote, you can never afford to allow anyone at any time to have instant gratification at your expense, Carl. You're not here to be available on somebody else's demand at any time, period. Play hard to get, take your time, listen to your feelings, unquote. Ross says, yeah, well, that's tough. As in, also to never compare yourself or model after what Ross says. As in, you're going to say it in your own way, appropriate to your design and that being. Yeah. So your recognition of, can you, I might say to this man, because I can't be a manifester and tell you what to do. You know, I can ask this guy, can you play hard to get? Can you experiment with playing hard to get? Remember to take your time, listen to your feelings, feel your emotions, don't shut them off, you know, allow them to flow, that kind of thing. So the first key in understanding the not self of somebody's design is, what is it that is running around inside their head telling them what to do? This is a being who doesn't listen to their feelings, according to Ra. What they're hearing is what their identity is spouting all the time because it's coming out of their mouth, right? And what floats around in that open mind of theirs is that they're far, far away from their emotionality. This is somebody who would have a lot of trouble with their sexuality because quite frankly, you can just see it. Why would you see a problem with sexuality here? You have a stream of desire. It's mostly unconscious with very, very physical gates. Why is it very physical? Because of the unconscious, right? So the unconscious physical gates, I saw Venus there in the gate of crisis, sexuality, right? Where's that 30? Here, Saturn. Okay. So you have a deep physical sacral here too. We see that 42. What happens when people are not operating in alignment? They're coming from not self, right? They're coming from their mind's conditioned adaptive strategies. And at the same time, it's totally disconnected from this projected element that's running this person's life, their conscious personality, yeah, what they hear themselves say. So this is a man who, if we combine the not self purpose, I have to prove I know what I'm talking about relative to what's interesting and inspiring and what I'm certain. Okay. He's here to be very wise about how to explain other people's mental processes. And there, look, what did he do? Jung. Yeah, he made his money off of psychology. Helping people feel better about their self-esteem and self-worth relative to what the mind is doing. But then using that mind process and that lack of self-esteem or self-worth in an attempt to make decisions out of integrity of waiting for the response and the emotional clarity. Right there, we have just described the person's vulnerability. So that's the first key, is to remember they have a vulnerability. What do you see? What is the not self signpost? Dissatisfaction, frustration with this one, okay? You cannot look at this chart, Ross says, and use the open centers of the head, ajna, and ego in terms of trying to understand the way in which the not self works in this design in the same way that you can do with somebody who is a single definition, though, because the game has changed. Why? The game has completely changed because you've got a basic split here. So when you're dealing with a split definition, you're dealing with a human being that is divided. It's an obvious division. That's why you see Laveena always first things first. What is the definition? Because that leads us to the priority. It's not a division that carries any connotation of this or that, good, bad, right, wrong. No, it's simply a fact. In other words, there's two very distinct aspects of this person and how they're going to interpret what's going on inside relative to the world around them. So when you're dealing with this basic binary, there's something to grasp. The sole pressure in the life is not whether or not Jung was going to get his ego defined. That's not the most important thing. The sole pressure is, how do we bring these two parts together? Because it's always about that when you see a basic split of any kind, okay? How are we going to get the two parts together? As well as when you look at a quad, you're looking at how are you going to get all four parts together? So, in other words, everything about the way in which genetics work in a split definition. And again, when I say split, I'm only speaking in this context. If I was going to refer to all split definitions, I would say so. This is just now here. Let's talk about just the simple split for two parts. When you're dealing with a two-part phenomenon, you have to see that the not self strategy, the primary, to use the terminology, the primary not self strategy is not in the center, but it's the potential for the bridging gates to bring things together. Now, please list for me some bridging gates that you see that you would prioritize immediately. I see one right off the bat. I'm going to go, yep, that one. What would I see? Yeah, 50. Absolutely. What else? 14. Excellent. What else? One more. Glaringly obvious. Look up at the throat, guys. What do you see? Going to bridge the split. Real quickly within the stream. This is a man who 35 is up there. Yeah, excellent. Okay. So those are the quickest, fastest, easiest ways. What else? What else do you see? If we didn't have those connected, there's two more. did I see? 38 and 54. Excellent. Did we miss any? Or is that enough? I see one more. Really hard to sometimes see. One more. Follow the flows of energy. It's kind of hard because there's a channel there. Here's your hint. There's a lot of channels there. There you go. 34. Excellent. Isn't that fun? Okay. So that's the basic. That's complex though. Hey, that is very complex. That's a lot of different keynotes to weave together. So if we were going to keynote weave that together, you have your work cut out for you, as in, how might I explain this? You know, the primary not self strategy. First and foremost, of course, it's going to integrate to the totality of the not self purpose, but it's the primary. It's the, I would say, the concentrated area of conditioning. Because it's diffuse, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We found 6 different strong potentials for the bridges to be there. That means it's a little bit more diffuse than this to say one person or one activation, right? That would be really easy to do. This one's more diffuse, as in there's a lot more going on there too, still concentrated relative to conditioning. So, for example, here when you're looking at Jung's chart, and this is a very complex variation, obviously, you can see there are a number of ways that the split can be brought together. So we can start with the root. You see the 38 and the 54. We also see that the 14 is there, also the 50, and also the 36, 35 right there, 35, right? So we got them all. So all of those, just one of those really is needed to put that split bridging elements together. He says, you have 5 variations. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6. He made a slight mistake there. You have 6 different things that genetically carry the deepest conditioning force in this being's life. There's something else to consider, and something quite important to consider. There are different kinds of simple splits. In all of the cases here, the split definition can be linked by the simple activation of a single gate. And there's a difference in psychology. If you need a gate to join your split, or if you need a whole channel or more to join your split, you remember? Instead of the problem being with me, it's a problem with the other. If it's a wide split or very wide, it's the world out there, right? So in other words, the primary conditioning, when you have a split, a basic split, 2 parts at play, the way one is going to respond and make decisions in their life, the primary conditioning doesn't come out of the open centers, but it comes out of those deeply conditioned gates where this person, because it's just a single step, sees the missing gate at the other end as their own personal problem, and then they try to compensate for it. So in other words, what you have to see is that the primary conditioning forces in the split definitions chart begins with the harmonic gates they don't have activated in their natal design. And it makes it easier to be able to read fairly precisely what the impact is going to be, because you get to see the impact not spread out over a center, but you see it specifically operating through a gate that is going to be part of the conditioning force. So then if we take what we know about the basic design, and this is why it's so important to review your client's design before you go into the analysis of the solar cycle. Be familiar with it and then see, oh, what does the solar cycle bring in? Because that's going to be additional concentrated conditioning for that year, right? So the moment we go from the natal chart and move over to the solar return, we are going to be able to have the keys to look at very basic things. We want to see if there's any gates that are going to join the split, because that's going to give us a very deep insight into their thematics for this year in the openness. We want to see if there are, in fact, definitions that are going to define the open centers, because they still remain a force of conditioning and a secondary force in the way in which the not self mind is going to operate. Okay, priority-wise, concentrated conditioning in the split. You see the solar return bringing in that energy, then you know that that's going to be really in that person's face. Why? Why would it be really in that person's face? Mechanically speaking, what does this create? All of these. What kind of conditioning is it? If this was a relational dynamic between him and a person, what would we call these? It would be right in their face, and we would call it an electromagnetic. It would be people if it's the inner planets, okay? People if it's the inner planets, if that was their solar principle, right? But we call it personal because whether it be an electromagnetic, whether it be a compromise, it's still going to be incredibly personal. So somebody, a person, or a developmental theme, if it's the larger outer planets, that conditions that being. Now, he says, then I want to focus on the nodes to give you this sense of how you frame the background of the reading. This is the environment and how that you're going to have to deal with, and therefore within this environment, there are these forces. Then we can go look at our weather conditioning themes, our weather impact themes, and then we can begin to piece together the story of how the scene is going to be set. Remember the nodes. The scene is going to be set. And the characters that are going to play a part in that scene. What people or what themes are going to be right there in his face for that year. So here's the solar return that we're looking at. He says our keys are going to be the single gates that are missing. We can see that 3 of them are going to be activated. These 3 gates that are being activated, 2 out of the root. Okay, 38, opposition, 54, marrying maiden. And then out of the splenic center, look at this. We've got a 44 going to the harmonic in the heart. And that's the 26, his own, that is defining the ego, that temporary conditioning for the year that's normally undefined. So those are those themes that are coming in, the missing single gates that come in. So we actually only have 2 gates, the 38 and the 54, that are going to be the theme of the bridging for that person's year, because these are the ones that are being activated thematically in this whole construct of the way in which the split in this year is going to be connected, how it can be connected, either by people or developmentally. So let's look at this for a moment. We see the gate 38 in the solar return. The return here, he said Saturn. Oh, activated by Saturn. So there it is. It's the Saturn. That's a heavy one, right? Saturn in this solar return is fascinating because both 38 and 54, the 2 gates that are activated, bringing some pressure, deep conditioning for that year. It's going to affect the way his not self mind operates. And how might we experience Saturn? What kind of energy? Is it going to be light and fluffy? Probably not. It's going to be heavy. It's going to feel like limitation, restrictive. Great word there. What else might it feel like? Pain, suffering, limitation. Might be disciplined. Yeah, restrictive, constricted. The mind process may be constricted. Restraint, pressure, stress, we can add on because it's the root. Order, I like that on. Yeah, inhalation. Inhalation is Pluto. Pluto is inhalation. Exhalation is Saturn. Yeah, holding the breath is Saturn on the physical side. So that's over here, the design side. The 54-4 is the activation. This is enlightenment and darkenment, rather special, very unusual, because there is no detriment. It's the alpha and the omega. So it's all about the potential of being recognized by forces beyond what we would consider to be the real, the potential of being in touch with those mystical forces, something that's driving him to have a transformational mystical quality this year. Okay, that's the thing that is being experienced. So marrying maiden, the gate of drive, enlightenment and darkenment, in this most mystical of positions, there is neither an exaltation nor a detriment, because in truth, they are one and the same. The alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end. There is no description possible. Each planet will manifest this energy uniquely with absolutely no guarantee that its effects will even be perceived. However, the potential is always there. So this is the fuel for transformation. Remember, it's a fuel gate for transformation, the name of the channel, at its purest level. No polarity, no specific planetary accent. So we look to see what planetary aspect is coming in. We see Saturn, which we know can feel quite punishing or bring discipline or restriction, restraint, constraint. Okay, so when we look at these two channels for the design, they represent two things. Transformation that's going to benefit the whole as a struggle that is going to benefit the individual. So there you have synthesis from Ra, the way that he would describe it. We see this year may bring in some deep transformation that might be a struggle. Transformation and support of you with your tribe, and struggle in support of you as an individual. So, in other words, to be able to find one's purpose, but to also have the strength to transform the tribe, because the whole purpose of a 3254 is to provide the basic ingredients for the continuation of the success of the tribe on the material plane in order to make more money. Because here we have the stream of instinct, and here we have the stream of capitalism, and here is where we make money right there. Okay. So in order to have more material, more stuff, the ego, it's about the material plane, the heart of the material way, the ego, to have more material, safety, security, well-being in order to survive and thrive. Okay. So restrictions upon that ambition, constraint on one's influence. You have to put into account what planet is there. There's no specific planetary aspect, so there's not going to be an exaltation or detriment. But what is the planet actually standing for? Because it's an outer planet, it's going to be developmental. It's not necessarily a person. It's going to be developmental, and it's going to feel personal relative to that conditioning, that thematic. So again, remember, when you're looking at how do I describe the conditioning, they don't normally have the channel. So the channel is how you describe the conditioning. If you were only to say they're going to have an ambitious year, then that's not completely accurate, because Saturn restricts, pains, disciplines, punishes, slows things down. Saturn is slow. 30 years to go around the mandala. The conditioning is the channel name. Okay, the channel name. That's how we label conditioning, the channel name, because they don't normally have that channel. And this is one of the concentrated areas of conditioning that's coming in because of the solar return. We focus all of our attention there. It's not a foundation analysis. You do not have to talk about values and power or empowerment and progress or change and direction, power skills, direction, the beat, keeper of the keys. You don't, because you're just reading the solar return. So we focus on what's actually coming in. And that's how you do it right there. Okay. So let's take a look at what this means in terms of the way in which the mind is going to react to this and where all these things are coming from. Saturn. They're coming from Saturn, and this is personal, but it's also developmental, larger outer planets. In other words, it's not coming from people. This is not an ambitious person with the 54th gate entering into this person's life. It's not about somebody who's a fighter stepping into the opposition game, carrying this 38th gate and stepping into this person's life in order to be stubborn, in order to fight. It's just Saturn itself. This is developmental. So what is there to be developed? What is this all about? Stress and pressure. From one level, again, the disadvantage of hindsight is because it's so obvious that we're dealing with the last solar return, that there's a pressure for transformation individually on this person's life for this year. Now, if I was doing this design, he says, and this wasn't Jung, and this wasn't 1960, I was just looking at this configuration, what I would really see is that this is a year where there's going to be a real change for the being. This is the point. They're operating in not self, guaranteed a change, a real transformation. Yeah, a real transformative struggle for that year. That transformation is going to bring struggle. It's not going to be easy, and it's going to require the being to be steadfast in their response with clarity in order to be correct. Now, steadfast, we think of the fourth line. Fourth line, remember, wherever you have four, and this is what this person is here for, a 2-4, the body being the dominant force when one is correct, this is someone who is here to have influence. In other words, just on the very surface, this is a year where there's going to be tremendous amount of pressure for change and transformation that leads on to material success, but material potential and success for transformation that leads to the discovery of individual purpose to help one find one's purpose. And we know that the 28th gate brings fear of death, yeah, dying without achieving one's purpose. That 32 is the gate of failure, right? Fear of failure. Where's that 32? Here we go. Fear of failure. We can see that the solar return is affecting it. So there are going to be some themes in this year for this person to deal with, and they have to develop in relationship to those themes. Now, it's not uncommon because these are hanging gates for the being. So it's a most constant due to people and conditioning that this is going to be a theme. And yet for this year, it's very specific. It's developmental and it's Saturn. So it's going to be slow. It's going to feel like discipline, restriction, pain, suffering, restraint. It's not going to be happy, happy, joy, joy. Ooh, mystical enlightenment now. Sorry, being silly to help us remember. Look at the planet, okay? Look at the planet. If it wasn't this chart, it would be that you may have to deal with death around you this year, okay? You may have to deal with the fact that you're getting older. Saturn in ancient, not specifically ancient, traditionally Saturn in the more recent times was seen as a bringer of doom, okay? As in painful, aging, calcification, bones, you know, breaking of the bones. If it wasn't this chart, you may have to deal with the fact that you're getting older and this may be beginning to break down, whatever the case may be. Also, you have to deal with this potential theme of failure. So it's activating certain things in the design in a very particular way. It's influencing it in a very particular way. Now, you could go into all the details, all the way down to the lines and stuff, but the thing that's really important is just to be able to deal with the surface. What are we seeing on the surface? Because if you can get them to operate correctly as themselves, if this can inspire them, hey, remember to follow your response over time with clarity, as an example. The reaffirmation of what is the priority for this emotional generator, then these are themes that can be very exciting. They can pick and choose from the smorgasbord and not get banded about, thrown about by the shifting seas over time. In other words, there is this opportunity for transformation that is guided by a higher force because there is this unusual 54-4. It's not a person. It's a higher power. Saturn can be very rigid and difficult. If we look at the 38-5, Saturn is exalted, a stage in opposition when one is totally isolated, okay? Totally isolated. The energy to stubbornly fight alone, fifth lines, go at it alone, yeah? There is this alienation here for fifth lines. You can take any fifth line quality and apply it across the board. Any other fifth lines feel like aliens? May have a strong individuality too. This is in the individuality. as far as where it happens to be. So isolated. That now combine that with this ambition, we are seeing it's interesting because it's combining with the 54 theme. These are the Saturn themes this year. The concentration to endure, the energy to stubbornly fight alone. So this is somebody who's going to have a struggle in which they're going to have to fight alone. What does that tell you? It tells you nobody's going to fight with him. You're going to have to fight alone this year. And it might be a struggle, but there's a potential for some deep transformation if you wait for your clarity in response in order to know what to do, what action to take. So let's take a moment, step away, look at the centers for a second. Because specifically, we're going to look at the ego because it is definitely linked to, tied into all of this. Why? Because it's got the entirety of the stream for this year. The stream that is about instincts as well as material gain. Yeah. The heart of the material way right here, going through this left side of the body graph, this stream. So it's tied into all of this because of the primary conditioning force for this being, that the whole stream gets completed with the activation of the 44 and Neptune being there in that 44. What do we know about Neptune relative to keynotes? How does that rhyme somewhat with the 54-4? We saw that the 54-4 was mystical, yeah, hidden or illusion, art, spirituality, mysticality. Those kind of rhyme, don't they? So we're seeing the linkages of what this person's thematics are. It's like you're looking for clues in order to fashion a story out of the symbology that you're reading, that you're looking at. It's all about the mastery of the collective, says the 44. Isn't that interesting? Mastery of the collective. This is tribal. It's a tribal thematic, but it's here with the first line, mastery of the collective that can establish restrictive conditions for inferior components and with the ability to enforce them. In other words, we've got alertness to the patterns or the failure of the instinct because there's a need for harmony here. So somebody who's going to be driven by the need for harmony when in fact they have to stubbornly go at it alone. So there's something hidden there from away from them. Energy stubbornly fighting alone. When we think about that, we're looking at how any cycle is a palette of things. Doesn't mean that he's either going to get his 54 or 38 or 44. They are possibilities, not guarantees, possibilities. The fact is, the further away from his strategy and authority, his nature, the more all of these forces, remember, we're reading a solar return. So in this case, talking about the 54 and the 38, those things are going to impact this being. So Alex is keynoting an external, oh, there's a kitty in my view. Hang on. Come here, kitty, move. External and unconscious drive to earn more, to prove his worth. Earn more to prove his worth. External and unconscious drive. External. So, all right, tell me which keynotes you're working with, Alex.
Yeah, probably that is incomplete. I actually, I'm not taking into account the transmitter and surrender. But since the transit to the design, they feel like it's being done to you. That's why I put it like external and unconscious drive, a drive because it's in the root, the 54, to earn more. Because it's in the heart center to prove his worth. Because it's like in the stream of capitalism, earn more. Probably it's a keynote that can resonate. I don't know if this person would be working in corporate, I would say like escalate the ladder or something. But if it's an entrepreneur or independent worker, I would say probably, I don't know, yeah, just earn more. But I don't know if that's correct.
Yeah, so I would definitely on keynotes like that go away from the line qualities. Yeah, we're imagining a big picture view. Remember to, like you did perfectly there. If this person, then maybe that. Or if this person is, this situation, then maybe that. That's a great recognition about how you might do that. But remember too, we don't want to put it from the perspective of, oh, you're going to get this, because again, they're not guaranteed. It is the further away, like the more frustrated he is, he's absolutely going to guarantee that he's frustrated because he's getting pulled away from what's right for him. The solar return is not self. All of these activations, these are places that we remember to warn them against, to be wary of, to be cautious of, to make more money potentially. I haven't looked to analyze what's over here. Maybe, quite possibly. Okay, so the further away from the nature, yep. He says, remember, if this is somebody who's operating correctly as themselves, there's discernment in that. In other words, it may not be the season for them to go through this struggle or stubbornness process. It may not, it's an or not, may not be a key developmental area for them. As a matter of fact, if they're really operating as themselves, this is not a conditioning force. This is something that they're there to learn about. And the moment that you move away from that force being something that you take personally, it only then becomes something that you see in the other. So in the connective field, potentially developmentally. So he's not going to necessarily see this personally in someone else, but maybe he's seeing the developmental restrictions on someone to transform and rise up in order to transmit, in order to make their way up the ladder. So you see how instead of taking it personally, if he's interpreting through his response with emotional clarity, he's going to see that as part of his interaction with others, even though that's not a person. Did you guys get that?
Yeah, so if it's tribal, probably he's supporting another's transformation and escalating the ladder or earning more or making more money, but not personally. It's more like he's learning from an experience in interaction with another.
Because he's a basic split, he's here to have a collaboration. And so that's going to be affecting the themes for his collaboration for that year. That's the wisdom. See, we always have the flip side of the coin. If they're operating from not self, then it's not going to have the same kind of impact as far as the conditioning is. The wisdom potential is he gets to see it as part of the thematic. So everything about doing, coming wise about it. Excellent on just a theme. Everything about doing anybody's reading, Ross says, is to bring them back over and over and over again to the basics. You have to operate correctly as yourself. Otherwise, you don't know what track to take. You're not going to be correct. This is an energy being. So a deep, powerful energy being who needs to operate out of their emotional awareness, the emotional clarity, which takes time. And only out of that emotional clarity, they're going to be able to enter into the right developmental process through these pressures, these stressors. It is going to be there. If they're operating in alignment, it's going to be part of the developmental thematic for that year. This is a year where you will have a chance, is the way that he would phrase it. So, as an example, this is the year where you can end up in an important struggle to find your purpose in this life. This is a year where you can finally find a way to be transformed in terms of the way in which you can reach out and impact the community, and so forth and so on. Now, interestingly, still waiting for response with emotional clarity. Okay, response with emotional clarity. If we see impact, fifth line, as a potential. Or influence, we can use with fourth line as a potential. We see in the environment, we have fifth line nodes, and we see in the environment, second line nodes. So the overlay on top of the nodes for that year are going to be slightly different. You see the consciously, it is harmonic. Unconsciously, it's dissonant. Always compare apples with apples if you can, possibly, because you don't want to get too confused by too many different options in explaining the little mini scenes that are new for this year. So let's go take a look at the environment then. If we're going to take a look at what's been laid out for this year, we look at the nodes and we begin with looking at the personality. Personality nodes are what your client is going to be attuned to seeing. We're all connected to our own personality. We're all going to be connected to what's there on the surface. So just like you got your regular glasses this year, putting on clip-on shades that have a particular frame of reference or view. So this one's attuned to strangers. Yeah, the heretics, the leaders, those messengers with questions. They have questions. I have a doubt. And you'll be like, doubts? You know, that's the way that they're designed to see those people or the frame of reference. Doubts or confusions. Doubts in the first part of the year, 63, confusions in the second. So we see this 63-64 combination. We already know that that south node phase is going to have an impact because it's going to form an educational definition channel, right? Education, because he doesn't have anything personal inside of that channel. So as part of the weather impact for this year, it's educational for him. And it's a dominance, which means it's completely and utterly transitory. It's going to hook up with that fourth gate. Where is that fourth? There we go, Uranus. And together they're going to form this definition in the logic system, mental logic, this mental potential awareness of answers. What is 64? We know it's to be confusion. So what is this set that we've had? We have the movie sets, the movie screen. And how does it work? Everybody wants to time things. Yeah, what's inspiring to time? It's like in the first 6 months, 63, and 64 in the next 6 months, approximately. You don't have to give exact dates, but something approximate. Do remember that they're a mirror always in the nodes. You're always going to have an exact mirror. So they have a connective field between them. It's the same road, just labeled something different on one side of the road versus the other side of the road. It's movement of pressure here in this context, 63 and 64, right? Mental pressure, questions. The movement from 63 to 64. So it's actually going this way in this body graph. It is a movement, and in that 63, it means that the movement is going to be filled with doubt. What they're seeing is going to be filled with doubt. This means the heretical beings who are all around, the world where not a lot of people are in the background because it's the fives. Oh, we're up behind the curtain, peeking out. We don't really want to be seen. But here's what this being is going to be attuned to, where they don't really look like they necessarily know or understand what's going on. They've got doubts. So the doubt is in there in the environment for the first part of the year. You know, these people, they've got doubts here. Okay. Impersonal, exactly. Collective sharing of the doubts or not. These can be times that are full of doubt, times that are threatening to a specific set of formulas. Why would it be a threat? Remember what Uranus does? Oh, the monkey wrench. Oh, the sudden shifts. Oh, the wacky weirdness. Naturally, answers that might lead them to be threatening specific standards out there in the world, in the collective, because Uranus is rolling on its side. It's gonna, bring sudden mutations or transformational shifts. There's a repeating pattern for you. And so it brings its own revolution, its own mechanism, which will lead this person to have the potential to look at things that were once considered solid and assume perhaps they're not some solid. I have a doubt. It's not salad. It's pizza. How did that happen? Very different, In other words, an era of doubt, questions, doubt. An era of doubt that's condensed into an environment around this being that they're going to be moving through. So it's part of their view as far as it's overlaid on top of what they already have access to for this life. Okay. And worse than that, what is the doubt going to lead us to? Confusion. Remember, it's conditioning. So the doubt's going to lead us to a confusion because that's the movement in time through this person's space of what way it's going in moving through. So a confused environment, people who are confused. Doesn't sound very nice. These confused people that are here to be practical and yet they're all hiding and paranoid, right? Fives, paranoid. Now, one of the biggest problems, before I read that, one of the biggest problems that we have as analysts to fight against the surf, if you will. Most people take on conditioning and see that as themselves, as in, I now taking ownership. I am confused and I have a doubt. This one, technically, we're looking at the environmental channel. So it might be quite easy to take it on for self, but because it's the definition of the transit, it's going to be experienced like also other people. And when you're not self, taking on their doubt, taking on their logic, because this is the whole channel. So this year, this sudden shift of logic, and now you take it on, and now you use all this pressure to make a decision because of the way that you're seeing, rather than coming back to response with emotional clarity. You see? Oh, hang on, let me look up. Well, when people are confused, maybe they're driven, they feel driven to go to therapy, Alex is saying. So potential clients, and laughing, and Anna saying, indeed, was thinking the same. Yeah, great recognition there. Those are the people you're going to be helping and serving and supporting this year, right? Okay, time's full of doubt. And instead of, so too many analysts, and I've made this mistake when I didn't get it clearly, everybody does this, where in your experience, you take on what's going on in the nodes and take that on personally rather than seeing it, allowing it to be. Don't take it on personally, okay? This is not about them. This is the path that they're on that leads them to see in that way. So again, attunement. Think attunement when you see nodes on the conscious personality side. What is it that being is going to be conditioned to be attuned to this year that potentially pulls them away from their decision-making process? So a lot of mental pressure about the doubts. And Ross says, there are many opportunities in that though. It depends on the being. It depends on the time of life. If he was somebody who had the fourth gate, this would be a totally different value. In having the fourth gate himself, this would be a situation where he would be able to come up with formulas to what those people out there have doubts for. And he would be meeting all those beings who have the doubts. And this could be or would be very successful. But he doesn't have the four. It's Uranus and it's developmental. Okay? So then the fact of the matter is it's all there in the background because it's educational. This is something to understand. Thanks, Ra. Did you hear the pun? Understanding. Yeah, it's educational. The world is filled with doubt. It's filled with confusion in the second part of the year. And this is somebody who's going to be surrounded by the evidence of it. That doesn't mean that you necessarily, Carl, are going to be in doubt or confused, okay? Which is kind of the tendency of most of us analysts when we do this kind of reading, but that's not correct. It is seeing, and it's in the environment. So it's those beings out there. It's the environment that's like that, okay? Remember, nodes are environmental, mental in this case, particularly, especially. It's weather forecasting. So it means that here's the environment that you can be prepared for, that people are going to be doubtful and confused. So that's the first thing to look at. The personality has to deal with what appears to be an environment in which nothing is reliable. It's doubtful. Might hear people saying that, talking about that, looking for answers to that. He says, remember something. Here's somebody who has the 32 and doesn't have the 54. And if you have the 32 and it stands alone, continuity is always a theme, meaning there's going to be fear of failure. Remember, this is part of the memory circuit, right? So it remembers failure. That's what the 32 is here for, to prevent failure. And then to end up in a situation where you're dealing with an environment where it's obvious to you that people are in doubt and they're confused, there does not seem to be an answer available. Two, it's got to be called out of the beings around you. If it's a being, it's actually a thematic, a developmental learning thematic, right? So what are the natural answers that are going to come up unusually, suddenly, wackily, weirdly? More than that, if you look at the design side of this, we see that the south node is in the 36th gate. That is the darkening of the light. Here's the gate of crisis. And this is about times of decline, okay? Assistance to others in times of decline. It's about feelings that can assist others, that can benefit others in times of crisis. It really is about assistance to others in times of decline. So feelings benefiting others, selective assistance. Here we hear the second line. Second line's being picky, so selective. Selective assistance in times of crisis. So you're dealing with an environment, you say environment, okay, a place or an environmental context on the body side, where on one side, the neighborhood is filled with doubt. That's the way you're seeing. And on the other side, you're dealing with physical decline. He was 85 years old in 1960. So obviously, he'd be dealing with a world of decline around him. It's quite a natural thing to see, natural second line. Somebody he would have seconded in that sense, as in the experience, the experience of crisis. Again, what it's pointed towards is so interesting because that's the sixth gate over here. So the sixth gate, north node, gate of conflict, this is the gorilla. Everything about this interesting to Ra was that 59th gate would be the personality moon. And in the solar return, it was a second line as well. So we have a fully resonant channel created by the nodes, the environment, and a transitory. Moon is always just waxing and waning. You know, it's moody. It's there quickly. And so we see the 6-2. You have this deep theme that reinforces the natural, second line, retreat in this being, a deep theme. So the sensitivity to find the weakest point in a conflict and exploit it emotionally, or lack of sensitivity, blundering into conflicts. That would be the moon, but part of the environment. So it's not personal. It might be a person, but part of the environment. Moon, self-imposed barriers, people who are shy relative to the experience of how in the environment, the educational theme, nodally, and a person here, who is it that is, or what is it that's conditioning this year? It's a temporary thing, but the thing that's going to last for this cycle. Also see very clearly the real intimacy is lunar. That's the only real intimacy here. It's lunar. So it's only a real person who is somebody that is going, it's the only real person, or somebody that is going to be there because it's a second line. They're going to be shy because that's the genetic continuity theme, right? They're going to be shy or bold. They're going to vacillate, wax and wane. It doesn't have to be just the one person, though. It can be a number of people. And that's the difference right there between analyzing Carl and a person versus Carl and a cycle. We're talking about people. So a number of people, simply the various transiting aspects, people coming in, coming out of life, waxing and waning. Okay, the moon in 59 too is quite significant. When we're dealing with the moon, because it's an inner planet, we're dealing with people, somebody who's going to bring an education to Carl for that year, somebody who's going to be able to move through barriers. What is a two? Barrier master. If we go back to reading the second line in the 59, see, self-imposed barriers, calculated shyness rooted in deep psychological barriers that even in dynamic individuals will always restrict interaction. It talks about infertility here, rooted psychologically or biologically, that conditions the drive for separateness. Now, because we have the whole channel, we know we call that the aura breaker. So what additional themes might he be dealing with? People who are had their aura broken because it's environmental, right? It's environmental and it's people. So people who can move through barriers, potentially breaking down barriers. And this is the detriment. So it's a deep psychological barrier. The word psychology only appears in, he said, I think 3 lines in the 384 lines. It's interesting that it would be here. That even in dynamic individuals will always restrict interaction. Okay, that infertility rooted psychologically or biologically, that conditions the drive for separateness. One of the things he's going to be educated to then would be separateness. Okay, separateness, shyness, self-imposed barriers educationally. When we're dealing with the theme of education, it's very clear that you can just be simple in terms of what you're looking at and understanding that this is a background field, that educational channels are what they get to learn through what they see around them. Why? Because it's not personal to them relative to, it's not hooking up with them personally. It's not part of them biologically. It's something outside of them. That's what educational channels are speaking to, outside of you. Now, the other thing that's interesting, by the way, because I like to stay with the surface, he says, one of the things to know is that when you look at the solar return, you can see also, despite the fact that the head center is defined to the ajna, that now the solar return is creating a split. And it means that there's a real disconnection because now there's a tremendous amount of pressure that can be there from this environmental connection of him with what's outside of him. So no outlet for it based upon the thematic of his design or the solar return design. So then there's a question, what about splits? For example, what could you say to him? Are you really going to be cut off from the doubts in your life because there's a split? And Ra says, yeah, well, he is going to be cut off from it in a way. But that just means that there is going to be all this pressure from it, right? Pressure of the questions, the doubts, pressuring down. And where is the gap that's going to create the focus? Because it's a 63-64, these are questions, first doubt, then confusion in the time orientation. He's not going to be able to escape it at all because it's part of the personality view. He's not going to be able to do anything about it. He can't go out there and bridge up his split. Excuse me, do you have the 43? Not necessarily. No, he's going to have this mental pressure that he's taking on from the environment and learning about the logic, the split being generated by the program itself. So in other words, he's not going to be able to use his mind the way he was born with this incredible openness that has no judgmentation whatsoever. He's going to be locked into seeing and processing the problems of doubt and then to confusion. So he may end up with a great deal of self-doubt and no way to resolve it or express it because thematically it's cut off. Now that's the conditioning. Can we come back to, instead of living up in the head, in making decisions we can trust, come back to the response with emotional clarity, because this is going to be a thematic for the year. So conditioning, not you. And oftentimes people take that on and think that it is supposed to be you, or that it's a problem with you, or that it's something to do something about. The only resolution to the openness is to go back to basics, strategy and authority. So that's why you mention it any chance you get. He says what it really indicates is that mentally, this mental pressure is going to be very uncomfortable because of no outlet for it. And this is somebody very much having to pull to what is their basic hermit nature, this fighting it alone, having to deal with things on their own. It's not going to be easy. It's something that would have to be very physical. They would have to ignore their mind a lot. Yeah, their mind, their conditioned thinking mind. And one of the themes here is how much pressure would be here. So this year, there's going to be some pressure there. But just to be mechanical in answering your question, no. If you have a split that is being generated by the program itself, it does not act in that way. So the 56th gate or the 43rd gate does not have any real significance in his design. It remains open. Okay, it remains open. So the pressure is there, but the solution is always still to come back to the decision-making process. And this is somebody who's going to learn about intimacy during the cycle. Okay. During the cycle, somebody who's going to learn something about the resolution of the doubt through an unusual formula that's getting called out in the environment because it's outside of him, about the possibility of really dealing with doubt in a fixed way to come up with a fixed theory or certainty. That's what the logic here is all about. Educational channel here in the environment. So remember, there was this other theme where the risk for him, potentially in that 44, remember, where he was wanting to find pressure through harmony, pressure on him to finding harmony with others. And at the same time, he has to go at it alone. That the real teaching he's going to get from a person or from people is that he's on his own. He's going to have to deal with things on his own. That's the environment. And you can see that when somebody is going to enter into a nodal environment like this, how dense, remember, perceptually seeing and what path he's walking, what he's seeing along that path, how he's seeing that path. The moment you begin to accentuate it, when you see it creating definition, becomes very tangible, solid, real, something that they can see or pay attention to, be aware of, potentially. So if you see that in the environment, then you can see that everything that's going on in the characteristics of this person's chart. Remember, when you're dealing with rave return, solar return, you're dealing with characteristics. The threat of conditioning of characteristics that pulls to the characteristics brings to us by pulling us away from the potential of our true self. That's how Ra would prefer that us deal with. He's going to have to deal with everything all on his own. Deal with it was the first part of the class when we were talking about down here. He's going to have to go it alone. He's going to have to fight it alone. He's going to have to deal with things on his own. That's what the transit is teaching him. Saturn, personality, alienation, a stage in opposition where one is totally isolated, the ambition and concentration to endure, this energy to stubbornly fight alone, because this is his personality. So if we go back to the themes of the conditioning, 38 and 54, when we look at the 38th gate, the personality Saturn in that 38.5 is the exaltation. So where the struggle that he has to be totally alone, that's the conditioning of the solar return. That's not alien to this person because second lines, don't bother me, leave me alone, you know? And then aloneness, fourth line, as a medium of creativity. So it kind of rhymes. This is a hermit, 2-4, cross of the unexpected. So there's this push-pull dynamic. I want friends, says the body. Don't bother me, leave me alone, says the 2. So it kind of rhymes. Remember, second line harmonic to the 5th. Yeah. Second line is waiting for the call. 5th line is putting out a call potentially. So if we think about this context of the 38, going it alone within the context of a stage that's been set that says it's a good goddamn idea to go at it alone. Do you understand? Do you understand that it's time to go at it alone? In other words, here is this environment that's full of doubt and crisis, and there's all this confusion around, and it's not possible to get support from the outside. Ra says it's not, because this is what the theme is setting, the stage is setting. Second line. Yeah? If no one's going to find purpose in this, if one is going to find one's purpose in this, one is going to have to fight alone. One is going to have to go through it alone. That's the conditioning. Think about it. That's not necessarily correct, because if we think back to what this being is here for, they're a basic split. They're a basic split. He's collective, strongly. He's networking. He's not here to go it alone, but that's the conditioning of the transit. You see that? Surprised, he says, because it isn't, not necessarily correct. We're looking at the solar return, it's conditioning. So because whether that person is going to enter into the 38 conditioning voluntarily is determined by whether or not they're responding to this correctly as an emotional generator, responding with emotional clarity. As an emotional generator, they can end up rejecting this pull of conditioning because, after all, it's not them. None of this stuff in green that you see in the illustration is them. It has nothing to do with them. It's just the environment. It's just the background. It's just the frequency. So, you know, what's interesting as I go through this step by step with you is that if we were to do 2 readings, one being going through this completely as not self, which is what Ra wants you to do. Hey, this is not self to the being, because overwhelmingly, this is not you. This is not true for you. But the little picking, sampling, oh, this might be right. Oh, this might be right. That being, if they were an analyst too, in reflection after the experience, they could go, you know what? This was right for me. I picked that and that brought me satisfaction. Or this thing, oh, that really threw me off track. It brought me frustration, you see. Just the background, just the frequency. It's not you. Any of the solar return stuff, the yearly cycle, is not movement towards purpose. It pulls you away from purpose, mostly. Okay? So whether or not this aspect or that aspect of the frequency, or what combination of them, can only be determined by their authority, because only their authority knows, nothing else does. And that's where Laveena has had the biggest bugaboo ever in trying to do this work, because of wanting to be able to give advice, people asking, is this right for me? You know, and wanting to give them something that they want to hear, and either confirming or denying. That takes their power back. No, it's not right for me to choose for you. Is it satisfying for you? So turning the question right back around. I'm going to stop right here and give you a little bit of a recognition. The person who holds the question has the power, as in directs the conversation. So when they're asking you, I have a question, okay, that's taking the power from you and putting it on, from them and putting it on you. So by questioning them back, that puts the power back in their court to be their own authority. Just like if they were a spontaneous recognizer or a generator sacral, I could just put it right back and get a you know? And there we go, right there. There's the power. Is this right for you? Now, it's all hypothetical if you're doing it at the beginning of the year, because we're not there yet. So maybe you have a half a year checkpoint, touch and base. Here's my annual solar package for you. We're going to meet here at the beginning, right? 3 months before your birthday. And then we're going to meet 6 months into the year and see how you're doing. Yeah, something like that. And then if stuff comes up, you can turn it right back around and ask them. That might be something fun for you to do if you like it. That idea feels fun. Okay, now going back to the it's not an intellectual decision. I'll take this 38, but not the 54. Or I'll take that 44, surprise everybody, and just forget all of this stuff down here. Or maybe I just want to have some fun. I just want to make some money, whatever the case may be. He's just playing now with that. What's so important to grasp is that the decision has to come from the authority. And that's why we cannot. No, you would just inform the manifester, right? I was just being like, as an example. We would give the projector their recognition process, turn it back to their authority. We would give information to the manifester, give it back to their authority. We would initiate the lunar being into their own lunar process, have them go through their own authority, because that's the whole point with this work. It's what's so different about approaching this. So if you're an astrologer already and you have lots of history making predictions, this is not to make predictions over somebody's life and tell them what to do or advise them on what to do. It is about helping them not negate, but stay afloat. Yeah. Instead of substantiating the conditioning, it's helping them to bring them back home to what's their authoritative principle. So it's a very different process. Otherwise, think about what's really going to happen. It's really going to get very confusing. There's this pull towards, but I have to try and find harmony. And I feel like, even though I should feel like I should do it alone, I'm going to get all confused. So this is the stuff that pulls you away from you. All this stuff that's going to get mixed up in there because everything is being there, doing its work, bringing the conditioning, losing that person in the homogenization of the background frequency field. So then he, instead of being the starring role in his life, becomes a part of the background, the movie set. And that's how we get homogenized. We get conditioned by transits. Furniture. He used to make this joke about furniture. He had this experience many years ago as a magazine publisher doing a shoot. The photographer was doing some scene. He called his assistant in and said he needed more furniture. He couldn't imagine what the photographer was talking about. In came a couple of models and he placed them in the scene. And he thought, how horrendous, what a term. Probably this person was into BDSM and subjugating people or putting them into context of things, stuff, not people. So degrading them to some point, to some degree. Ra says to really understand something, the moment you're not differentiating or discerning based on your authority, how you connect to the world around you, that's the moment you automatically become furniture. You are the stage set. You become the background stage set because you're doing all those things that are set up for it. Now, so you, Carl, do not have to be engaged with the confusion and the doubt at all. You don't. You'll see it. It's all around you, but it's not you. And that's the main problem of what people do in mistakenness, is they take on that and they become that and they become furniture, not starring roles. They're background aspects of the set. So that's the conditioning. So when you're doing this reading for someone, you're laying out a selection of possibilities or combinations of possibilities, and the themes are all there. Ross says it's obvious. For us, we got to study a bit, to get to practice and the language down. We've got to research, analyze, look at the software and such. But you do just want to pinpoint those places that are going to be a problem or a bugaboo. That's the things that you can do to help them orient to what's not true and what is, and what's right for them. What to do may not be clear. However, what to rely on and trust is always going to be clear. And that's our work, our job. He says, you have to see that for them, it's not clear. Because, especially if you're doing it in the beginning, you're warning them of the weather ahead. So you can describe the hurricane that is about to hit, but until they go through it, they won't necessarily recognize, realize, have that experience, right? So you're just warning them why it's important to, when you get confused or doubtful, to come back to what are you responding to? What are you clear about? Are you clear about going into this? Whatever. So people are ready to take all of this in without question. Because why? They believe their mind story, and this is what the mind is going to condition them to see, be and potentially do. So they'll take on that 38, that 54, that 44. They'll take on the educational channels. They'll take the whole thing on, muddle their way through with that defined ego thematic, where they're trying to prove something and all this stuff here. And then they'll come back, and if you read it, they'll tell you how terrific you were. Oh yeah, that thing you said absolutely happened. That thing and that thing and that thing and that thing that you warned me against. If you're not clear about, hey, this is transits, come back to this and this, they can get lost in that. We're not being a soothsayer and telling them their future. We're not necessarily being of service to their individuation process unless we get them back in touch with what they're here for, who they are. And that's why you begin with that. And always in the middle, remind them of that. Take every opportunity that you can. And don't just say, follow your strategy and authority. Do your best to give them, you can respond with emotional clarity. You can be patient to wait out this tsunami wave that you've got, however it is that's correct for you to language it. I like to try and do different ways of saying the same thing throughout an analysis so that when they listen back, one of those ways has got to resonate. And if they're all the same finger pointing at their own personal truth, then they come away with something that really crystallizes if they experiment with it. Okay? So they need to understand that this is a selection process based on their ability to discern what is correct for them. The pressure goes back on them. Don't let them put the pressure on you. It's not up to you to tell them what to do. The pressure is on them. And the pressure on them is not to understand how you get to the point of seeing that. It's not you educating them on how human design works. It's not a soothsayer, okay? You say that, I'm a soothsayer. That's not the right way to go about it. I'm going to tell you precisely what has happened. I'm a crystal ball reader. No, that's according to Ra. What you really are is that you're the anti-soothsayer. I'm going to tell you precisely all of the things that may not happen. It's up to you whether or not these things are right for you. Okay. Or maybe I'll tell you all these things that may happen, but it's up to you whether or not they're going to happen. I'll tell you what those themes are, but how you deal with them, how you operate within this set, this stage set, how powerful it is. When it comes to your question, Alex, 2644 might be an interspecies infection. Wouldn't say that to the client, but just curious. Well, interspecies, there's a lot of different points. This is just birds, reptiles, and fish. If we look at the 26, it's his. So it's his conscious mutation, his Mars. It's his mind. Is his mind going to be infected by a virus that's telling him to go and be harmonic with everybody? Harmony with everybody. Find the harmony with everybody. Manipulate the 44, coming to meet. Manipulate in order to have harmony. Get to the foundation. It's his body. It's his hydration. Is he going to have trouble potentially with his hydration and his immune system? Maybe. I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily go there. If they're manifesting, as in they come to you, I have this hydration problem. I'm constantly thirsty. And then you go and look at them. Well, maybe, but we don't really know. Not for certain. I don't know. If it's right for you to go into the differentiation degree program and study all that stuff, you might get to that point of expertise and mastery where you can do that kind of work because it is there. Okay. But just because they have a robust immune system and some gate comes in doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be sick. If they are not following their strategy and authority, most likely they're going to be dealing with colds for longer or illnesses for longer than they have to because they push themselves, they take their health for granted automatically. Most people who are defined in the splenic center that are operating in not self do. They push themselves beyond their limits. What if they're undefined in the sacral? Don't know what enough is enough. And so they don't rest and they don't heal up correctly from whatever illness. And so then that illness drags on longer and longer and longer and longer. Whereas somebody with an undefined who's wise about their health, safety, and security, the first touch of a bug, go lay down, go rest. Not continue to push yourself through, power through. So remember, everything can operate in a this or that binary. It's really hard to say just looking at the chart because we have to put it into context with what they're coming up with. So my recognition on what's easier as far as a way, it's not about prediction as far as what's going to happen. This may be a factor, and that illness thing could be a factor in anybody. So I don't know if that helped, but that's the end of our material. So I'll give you a break. Good. And if you have questions further, please feel free to stay and ask any after a little bit of a break, since I realized I didn't give you one. Okay, just raise your hand if you need some help, and I'll see you in a few. I'm so glad that was interesting. You're welcome, honey. Take care. Heal up, rest. First thing we do in a cycles reading, first, you explore the openness of the client's chart. You talk about their theme. You organize the not self strategies. Take note of the particular difficulties of their definition. If single or split, triple split, then you talk about the open centers. If basic split definition or quadruple split, it's the bridging gates first, then the open centers. Just like when you regularly analyze a chart. So you have to familiarize yourself with their chart. Otherwise, you're not going to be doing a good job with their rave return. And they need to know, get a reminder of what they're here for. Now, with the rave return, just like today, because we went through an example of a chart.
Is the same as the solar return?
A rave return is a solar return, yes.
Okay.
The solar return. So we start with the bridging gates if they're applicable, and the centers that are now temporarily defined through the solar weather. You're going to explore the themes of what the pressure is now that are present in those centers. Pay attention to the general thematics of the additional definition. That leads us to know what the not self strategies of the bridging gates are, and if it's applicable, and the open centers. You can also talk about the centers that remain open. So you're basically going through the vulnerabilities in the way that the not self is going to make decisions and deals with the world by tying it into any particular difficulty that might come with that year's particular definition as well. So you're focusing on what's actually happening this year. You're going to stick to the basics and only point out those things that you recognize that are going to have an impact. Mostly the personal and educational. For experienced clients, you might even go deeper, but personal is the electromagnetics and compromise. Educational is the whole channel. So those are the next step. So the impact of the general thematics, the general themes, okay? We have the weather impact that is personal. Again, electromagnetic compromise. Educational is the whole channel when it's dominance. And the environmental is at the very, very end. Not a big deal. You can even ignore it, but I would just keynote it simply by saying, okay, this is what is going to be in the environment. Blah, 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 blah. Any hanging gates that are not theirs. Just like we were talking about earlier today. Okay, hanging gate that are not theirs. Now, the weather conditioning themes, what's going to be there is the nodes of the moon give us the environmental direction. The personality is going to give how we see. The design is going to be the thematic of the environment that they're walking through that year. Inner planets show up as people. Outer planets show up as development. So you add those themes in with the weather impact. So this is where you have to start looking at and breaking down the themes that you're seeing like we demonstrated today. And that's it. You remind them at the end, follow their strategy and authority, just like every time you come up with any little difficulty, follow your strategy and authority. That these things may happen, but ultimately you are your own authority, that kind of thing, but specific to their chart.